I really genuinely believe that you can solve any problem when you really understand it. Not just look at problems narrow, but on a broad perspective and really understand the overall bigger picture. It's called backwards planning, but it can also be just a general thinking concept, right? That you not start from, okay, I have a plan now to deliver, and I start from what do I do now and what do I need to do next.
I think that's a good one. I think that's the final thing we should finish on. Benchmarking, but be curious, ask those questions, all those questions you asked and all those examples you gave. A lot of that comes from curiosity and wanting to really understand things. To our People Tech Talks live on LinkedIn. We are up to episode 3 now, and we have Thomas Kohler with us, and he's the founder of pplwise, and he provides senior talent acquisition managers to help you with all your recruitment needs. So we're going to chat with him today because he's, I'm going to say, an expert in this space. He's been around a lot and he's done a lot of amazing things, scaling businesses, bringing amazing talent in, and I think he's got some tips that we can all learn from. So welcome, Thomas.
Welcome, Jesse. Hi, Jesse. Thanks.
Hi. And okay, so we're going to talk today about frameworks to solve any recruitment problem. Now, this is a big, bold statement, I have to say. So I think we're all interested to hear about what are the problems that, are happening in the recruitment space, firstly.
Yes. So first of all, thanks again for organizing this live. I think it's really cool that you're doing this because I'm also podcasting for now 2 years closely, and I never did live. So I'm also learning. So I'm really curious. So I think why such a bold statement? Because I really genuinely believe that you can solve any problem when you really understand it. Yeah. And of course, the question of what is necessary to solve a problem is a different question. But in general, I think and believe that you can solve any problem if you truly understand it. And most problems, what I see in recruitment, when recruitment problems are not being solved, like hires at scale or individual hires are not being made, are always going down to a few similar problems that always occur again. So one problem is that I think it's just not realistic what is being asked for, and the company
Can you say that again? It's not realistic what's being asked for. So all the businesses out there, I agree with that one. Sometimes it's not realistic.
Yeah, we met, I think, at several companies now and worked together, and it was always the same problem, right? There was a demand. It came ad hoc. It came sometimes out of nowhere, and suddenly everybody wants roles across tech, across go-to-market, across other functions in several regions, or just one region, or just one function, all at once. And then you have maybe an internal recruiting team, or not even, and suddenly you need to deliver, 3x what is actually what would be possible, right? And the recruiting team would be capable of, or that companies don't even know what is capable and what they can deliver, right? Because they don't have the numbers and they don't understand really not just the problem, but also not the situation. What can a recruitment team deliver, right? And what can you expect as a business from your recruiting function? And I think that's number one problem. Number two problem, that it's maybe realistic to deliver just the poor numbers, for instance, in the time period, but there are roles maybe that are open for hundreds of days, and then it's maybe a sub problem in two sides. One problem is maybe that the value proposition of the company, of the role, is maybe not attractive enough or not even realistic. That for instance, the scope you set for a role or the manager set for a role does not really match what's available on the market, and then a recruiter would actually need to gather data, go into the market, and really educate the hiring managers, or the hiring managers even know because they have experience in hiring for these functions, to understand what is actually necessary to get the hire over the line, and also to find the right person for the role, right? And I think third is also that companies don't have the right infrastructure, hiring managers not being trained, talent acquisition teams are not really calibrated, or the tech infrastructure is just not there. So I think there are several sub problems, but ultimately I think it's just when you face something unrealistic and people are just not aware that it's something unrealistic.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. Sometimes people don't actually, there's problems, right? But people don't really know the root cause, finding out really what the challenge is. And is it the tech? Is it the team? Is it a combination of multiple factors, like you said? And I think it always comes down to the combination of multiple factors. I think the challenge is that how do you even know it's a problem if you can't see it? And that's where I think, the tech and having the right tech, having the data set up is where you can really know, not just guess, but know. And I think that's also things that I haven't seen done very well in the past. So we've got challenges, we've got world, these problems, I think we're all experienced them. What are the frameworks that you experienced or that you've, put in place that has helped you, alleviate these problems or make these problems better? Maybe they can't go away 100%, but what are things that, people can do today that can help them, especially going into 2025? Like, what can we do better next year?
Yeah, so I think there are some fundamental frameworks from finance, from general management, or just general thinking concepts that can be applied within the talent acquisition space that are maybe not frameworks from talent acquisition. But if you take them to talent acquisition, you can solve problems that also maybe are seen within talent acquisition, but the root cause is not within the talent acquisition function, right? So I think that's always important to understand, that you maybe not just look at problems narrow, but on a broad perspective, and really understand the overall bigger picture. So I think what's always helpful when you face a situation like this is maybe also a principle or frameworks from consulting. So I think the big consulting companies all use it to think in a certain way. McKinsey, for instance, calls it MISI. So first try to understand the situation in a mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive way, so that you first really get a full overview and a structure of the entire problem. Then you could also go into, let's say, some maybe general thinking frameworks and take the Pareto principle, where you then try to understand, if you have an overview of the situation and the problem, what is actually the biggest impact with the smallest input, and then solve it, not in parallel, not all at once, but in series, one by one, right? And let's say when you face now in December a big headcount plan that you need to deliver in 2025, but 2025, I think what we all know is sometimes Q1 2025 and not the full year 2025, because hiring takes time, ramp up takes time, onboarding takes time, right? And the hiring is always then planned for the first quarter or even month of the year. And also companies don't plan for the hires, maybe the more experienced and educated companies do, but I see also that companies just plan starters in January and they sign off everything in December, and nobody knows what's the time to hire. Nobody's considering it. Nobody really cares.
Everyone's got a number in January, like 100 hires in January, and you're like, it's December. Are we really going to hire 100 in January?
Yes, and then everybody's going on vacation through Christmas, through New Year, and then 1st of January everybody should start, but nobody's there to interview or kick off the roles, or maybe knows even what the roles will be, but it's just 100 in a certain area, for instance. So what the next step would be, this is more something maybe from finance. It's called backwards planning, but it can also be just a general thinking concept, right? That you not start from, okay, I have a plan now to deliver, and I start from what do I do now and what do I need to do next. It's more like, okay, what should be the end goal? And then think backwards until now, or maybe into the past, because if the backwards plan that you derive shows that, okay, when you need to hire or have starters in January, you should have actually started recruiting in July, August, September, maybe October, right? If you're fast.
And we're not going to be hiring in January.
No, exactly. But I think, and then the next principle is more maybe a management principle, is you as a recruiter need to then be able to build a business case, right? To also, for instance, let's take tech hiring and sales hiring. In sales hiring, it might be easier to make a business case out of it, why you then maybe need extra resources for a certain period of time, or what type of hires you deprioritize within the business, that your current hiring team can focus on the roles that have the biggest impact contributing to the 2025 strategy or strategic goals, for instance, right? And in sales, you can just calculate, okay, what's the target a seller needs to achieve? What's the overall maybe revenue or EBIT goal, for instance? And maybe revenue is one main driver of this. And then you could estimate, okay, what is a average seller doing? What's the average quota attainment? And what's the overall quota attainment, what we need to hit? And then you can also calculate, okay, how many sellers do we need to hire at a certain period of time that we hit the target? And then also you calculate the ramp up time. What's the ramp up time? And then you calculate also what's the time to hire, what type of talents you need to hire and ramp up in order that there's a high confidence level that the sales hires you make are also delivering what you expect for, right? If this is all clear, then you can really be a strong partner start now from a talent acquisition perspective to say, okay, I would recommend that we start the hiring and we prioritize the hiring in a certain way that we have the biggest impact for the business, right? And then maybe you don't achieve the overall ask, but you go into a conversation with the business and the ask becomes a realistic, committed, collaborative ask, and everybody's collaborating, right? So, but these are all things that you are not being taught in talent acquisition, in the talent acquisition function. What you maybe learn is, okay, interview with the STAR method, yeah, but this does not solve a business problem.
No, and I think a lot of I mean, personally being on the hiring manager side and on the recruitment side at different points in my career, when I was on the hiring manager side, you know, I always felt like it wasn't clear what was going on. Like I didn't know, like the data just was missing. Like there wasn't a lot of, you know, partnering like you're talking about. And I think the partnership of like having data from a talent acquisition perspective, knowing that backwards planning, like you talked about, I think is fantastic, because then you've got the right kind of numbers. You can talk to the business and a hiring manager feels a lot more secure. And actually I just saw something on LinkedIn that if you're told that there's going to be a delay, like we can't reach the hiring plan, everyone's like, like it's a shock to the system. But if you're told we can't reach the hiring plan, but this is what we can do, well, this is how long it's going to take to deliver.
And this is why we don't reach it, right?
This is why, but also like how long it's going to take us to get, you know, a result. Your body's like you as a human are less likely to be anxious about that outcome, because one is like there's a problem with no solution, and the other one is there's a problem but here's a solution, and it's like framed in the right way. And so you reduce anxiety and ambiguity straight away by having data and being able to share that. And I think that's what, you know, we need to get better at in the people function in general, but of course in recruitment is this like working with the business, talking the business language. And to be honest, like it's funny that we say talk the business language. Like recruitment is the business. Like people teams are the business. They're part of the business and they are business functions. And I think we need to start thinking more in that way. So I like what you've said. I think it's very interesting. One thing that I think would be interesting to go a little bit further into is, how do you know what the data is? What are things that people should be looking at in their systems, or what should they be putting in place, like the key things? Because it's great to say they need data and it's great to say, you know, you do backwards planning, but how do you do that realistically?
Let's go maybe again to, you need to hire a sales leader, like a CRO, a head of sales, or even an account executive or an SDR. Yeah. In Germany, let's say. And the company is maybe failing in doing so, or maybe not even. But I think how I always would approach it is first getting or quantifying the scope and the expectations towards a role into a data set. For instance, okay, we need to generate 1.5 million euros in revenue next year. So we need this person to start actually already pre-year, like October or in Q4, let's say, because we have 1 quarter of ramp up and then they're fully loaded. Okay, let's say we are too late, we don't achieve that. But we know that 1.4 million can be generated in 1 year. So we might hire then 2 people if the budget gives it, because then we can onboard maybe 2 in Q1. And then we have, let's say, 1 million each. So we would achieve 2 million in revenue, right? Or we hire an SDR plus an AE together, because if the AE is not doing the full prospecting and everything, then they maybe are even faster. Like it doesn't have to be this case, but you can do this at 10 million and then hiring 10 people or a team, or at 100 million. You can approach this in that way, that you just try to understand what's the expectation, what they need to generate. Then I would go backwards and say, okay, what are actually the activities, the sales channels, the closing frameworks that lead to that target attainment? How many people in the business, or what's the average target and quota attainment in the business, in the function? So did we already achieve that, or is it just a wild guess? Yeah. So questioning also then the data, and make it more qualitative. And then you have maybe okay, we have one high performer. He achieved it because I don't know, there was a lucky incident and now we expect this from everyone. Then I would say, okay, let's manage expectations. I would maybe lowball a bit and try to build a system somewhere else, but not expect it from the seller to reach something that was just a one shot, right? So I think setting data then in perspective is really important by asking the right questions and gathering the right data. what you could then do, okay, but what would then be a salary, for instance? What would you pay on a base salary, and what will you pay on target, for instance? And then you could say, okay, we plan for, I don't know, 80K base plus 100% OTE, so 50-50 split, that you could get 160 to 200 or maybe 250, I don't know, right? Okay, then you would ask for, okay, is it an enterprise sales or is it mid-market sales, or do you sell to small businesses or governmental accounts or even to consumers when you are in an insurance business, for instance, right? And then the question would be, okay, what's the sales cycle? Okay, if the sales cycle is 18 months, then I would highly question if within the first year you can achieve revenue overall, right? Maybe you can generate pipeline, but you not can generate maybe revenue. And when you have all this information, then you go into a hiring strategy and say, okay, where do we find those people? What are maybe similar businesses that also have a similar sales org setup and targets and revenue goals and revenue attainments, quota attainments, and then you go into the market, you make a list, you make do some conversations as a recruiter, as a sourcer, and then you just benchmark the data you generate. You ask, okay, in your current company, how many targets? What's your targets? What's the target, the quota attainment of the targets? What's the overall revenue contribution? What's the size of the business? You also need to do your research as a recruiter then. And then you go back to the hiring manager and say, okay, I talked to now 10 people and 9 of them are just far away from what we expect. And 1 is somewhere, but not close to what we expect. And this person is actually at 120 base and 250 OTE. So I would highly doubt that we can make this work. Otherwise, otherwise, or we should change something like, okay, I found that, for instance, if we pay more salary, we could maybe hire talent that already did that in a similar environment, right? And then you can go into the business again and say, okay, what is the data set you get in the market, and how can you maybe attract these talents and these candidates, and then also convert them, right? So I think this is an overall approach on how to do this, and this may be a bit too detailed, but overall you would also need to quantify, set the data in perspective, and then iterate.
So I think that was a perfect example. So if anyone listening here, it's a perfect example of where recruitment is not recruitment, right? It's not just like having calls and doing a job description. Like, this is strategic recruitment. This is how you need to understand the business. You need to understand the data. You need to understand the actual role within the business and what is achievable in terms of actually that person's output when they're brought into the business, to understand the market, to understand, where people are paid. And so I think, it's a perfect example of where, people underestimate, I think, the recruitment.
Yes, and also what is attracting them, for instance, and what is then important that you have a certain tech infrastructure to gather that. Because I now just talked to a very detailed individual case, but imagine your recruitment team is having per recruiter 10 to 25 interviews every week, and you have 5 recruiters. You generate hundreds of data sets every week and even month, right? So on an ongoing basis. Yep. If you don't structure this data in a certain way or gather it in a certain way, you are never able to do what I just said to the business overall, and you are never able to really influence decisions.
Because you don't have the data, because your systems aren't capturing it, because you're not. And, this is where I think the rise of AI is going to really help all functions, but especially recruitment, because all that data, like, someone's got to process and make sense of that data, get insights from that data, bring that data to a point where you can use it. And I tell you what, no one's got time to be doing that, but a system, AI, can just do that for you. So I think there's some benefits to having the right tech and also utilizing and leveraging AI where it's possible.
Just a cool thing what I just seen on the market. Talked to a founder who is building an AI copilot, like a TA admin copilot that is going into LinkedIn responses, that is going into listening into the MetaView API, going into the ATS, and is also going into the CRM system. It's still in beta, but then just going in all the systems and then abstracting or taking the data and then abstracting it to a reporting that is just individually important for the business. For instance, that you live can see, okay, currently my recruitment team is getting these responses from, let's say, LinkedIn messages, and these are the withdrawal reasons. and that's live. That's just going on. Okay. And the conversion funnels are currently from a reply rate or a interview booking rate below benchmark, because you can also listen into the other businesses. So this is still in beta, but I think this can be a game changer to that, because nobody is doing this on an ongoing basis. I always preach it, and I always say be data driven, but even we just can do it once a week, and at some point then just once a month, because you need to also focus on other stuff and other things. And this sounds all perfect, but in reality, you just don't prioritize it usually, right?
Yeah.
Unless you really need to solve it. But then if you don't do it on an ongoing basis, you have a lot of things to do, a lot of digging, and this is not fun, but it's really effective.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where, there's a lot of tech coming out like that, like a lot of these agents, and an agent's more or less AI that goes away and does tasks for you, right? It goes into systems and it takes data and it brings back and it does.
For instance, right, there is a reply on LinkedIn. And then the system cannot see, okay, what's actually the reply attribute. Is it a rejection? Is it a withdraw? Is it a meeting booked? Then the AI would highlight or even do it by themselves to say, okay, you're not interested. Why? And then the AI is responding and saying, okay, this is the reason, understood. And then adding it into Greenhouse, Ashby, whatever, into the ATS, and then adding the candidate, because sometimes you also don't have LinkedIn and the ATS connected. And then you see, okay, source candidates, reply, reason, withdraw because of timing is not right, for instance.
Exactly. And this is where I think game-changing tech is coming into play. It's something that I'm really deep into now, looking at all the different tech that can do this kind of automation for us, all the things that really allow us to then be more human. Because if you can have the data, you can do the partnering, you can do that expectation setting, you can have those conversations with real data that makes sense. You are informed, so you can inform the business with that data and you human optimize and put the effort where it's needed. So I think it's coming, and I think it's coming, it's there. It's just, how long it takes to get into the business, but I think it's going to be pretty quick. So in terms of so we talked about the framework. So I think just as a recap, we had Misi, you want to have everyone on the same page, right? The next thing is we've got the Pareto principle. So the 80-20, work out what 20% of effort is going to give you the biggest return. And I think that's something that can be utilized in all parts of the business, but especially in these kind of challenging topics, super good use of energy when you've got not a lot of time. Backwards planning, I think super, super important, not done a lot. I haven't seen it a lot. But
it's a pity.
It's a pity because actually it totally makes sense, especially
you can do it for every hire. You can just say, okay, this should be the start date. Okay, what's the notice period? What's the time to hire? But if you don't have the conversation up front, this will also never happen, because then you don't get the commitment usually.
Yeah, and all of that information can be built into all of your headcount planning. So when you're doing that process, which
100%
signed off and finished, I don't know how many companies will have actually done that plan. They will have been I need someone starting in January, February. Will anyone have actually looked at this type of data, gone, what is our team capable of? What is the market? Backwards plan, and then actually made something realistic? Probably not, but it's going to happen hopefully more and more into the future. After everyone watches this, they're all going to start doing it. So backwards planning, and then we have making sure to understand the data. So systems need to be the right systems. You need to capture the right data. You need to bring it together into insights that you can actually use to give that business case, to talk business language with your stakeholders, right? Recruiters are not just recruiters. They're not just having interviews. And I think that's critical because a lot of people underestimate what recruiters do.
I'm building a benchmarking from all the sales hires or the sales hiring we do, plus from also customers, because with my dinners, I organize around 20 dinners a year with executives and peers.
I've been to one of them. They're great, really insightful.
And the people also, I also hear, how do you do this? How do you that? Okay, how is it working? And then I thought about, okay, let's do it. For instance, I start with Germany sales hiring. Yeah. So everybody that wants benchmarks on for a certain, let's say, industry, for a certain ICP group. Is it, let's say, a consumer up to a governmental account through SMB, mid-market enterprise? I want to get the sales cycles. I want to get the revenue that is generated. I want to get the targets, the target attainments of the organizations. And I get this from candidates that work on in organizations, because the candidates also get tips on how to get the best sales job. And then they get benchmarked against other candidates who maybe got a job where they want to work. Yeah. And then I get the data holistically, right? Then from businesses that want the benchmark, they need to give me their benchmark data before.
Of course, I mean, that's how
and everything is anonymized there. Plus also our own data, what we see and also just
It's going to be so
judge it
powerful.
in a certain way. So everybody that is interested in sales benchmarking data, from hiring to sales data, right? Can just reach out. I'm just building this. It's also still in beta, and I want to contribute this to the people function, the sales function, to the CFO function, to the CEO function sometimes, right? Because this is really important. And this is actually, I think, the last framework I want to highlight. Do benchmarking. Benchmark your team members against other team members within your team, but also with peer companies. So you better be curious what you're doing against benchmark, right?
I think that's a good one. I think that's the final thing we should finish on. Benchmarking, but be curious, ask those questions. All those questions you asked and all those examples you gave, a lot of that comes from curiosity and wanting to really understand things. So I think everyone out there, we've got frameworks. You can use them across not only recruitment, but also other parts of the business, in HR, in really everywhere, even in your own personal life. And we've got the benchmarking that Thomas, I'm super excited to see this. So when it's out, tell me about it. If you want to participate, you got to reach out to him. But we're going to close up our third episode of People Tech Talks with Thomas. I'm really happy to have you on here sharing all your insights. If you would like to contact Thomas, you can follow him on LinkedIn and just reach out to him. He's very approachable, of course, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, everyone.
Jesse.